We're still a couple of minutes early.
Yeah, yeah. So there should be about 9 or 10 people coming today.
Okay.
Pretty full group. Just nice.
Whatever works.
Yes. So how's it going, Steve? How's life?
Good. Things are going great guns here. You know, good thing my motto is busy hands are happy hands.
Yeah.
It's definitely busy.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. Which is good. It's much better than the alternative.
That's true.
It's always important to consider the alternative.
I think Grant is high. So if people who are relatively new to Zoom, there's a button up at the top that might say gallery view. If it says gallery view for you, just click it once, and then it should say speaker view, and then you'll have a much better platform experience. Then every face should show up equally. How have people's weeks been? I was excited to read people's articles. They were really cool.
So is this a group that you meet with every week, Rosie?
Yeah. So this is the EdSurge independent cohort. So we meet once a week. We talk about education stuff. So we've talked about revolution in higher ed. We talked about data in education. Next week, we're talking about alternative and democratic school systems. We talk about all kinds of things. It's pretty cool. And then over the course of the semester, the cohort members write 3 articles for our Medium publication. And they're really, really, really awesome pieces. People write a huge variety of things and get really, really into it. And we have a pretty quickly expanding readership, and it's a really cool process.
Cool.
Yeah. So I was a member of the cohort last summer, and then last semester I volunteered as a leader. This semester I'm a fully paid up intern, and then over summer I'm doing a cohort leader thing again, and one of the people in this room will join me leading the cohort. We're actually releasing applications for that today, guys, so that'll be exciting. So
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we get started?
Let's get started. So I'll just very quickly, hi guys, this is would you prefer Dean Kosslyn?
I don't care.
Dean Kosslyn. This is so he is the founding dean of Minerva. It's pretty cool. So he's gonna talk to us today about the kind of psychology of information delivery, which should be a really cool addition to the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of teaching and learning and general pedagogies. So I will hand over to Dean Kosslyn. I'm going to be doing a kind of awkward PowerPoint screen share thing. So if you have questions, just take yourself off mute and politely interrupt. We're going to have a 20-minute Q&A session at the end, roughly. And then at the end, after Dean Kosslyn leaves, if you guys want to just stay around for 2 or 3 minutes, I have a couple of announcements to make. Brilliant.
All right, you should beam us up. So let me just say the following. Many of you have probably heard that lectures are actually not a very good way for students to learn. That's true, but it's particularly true given that most lecturers these days use PowerPoint, and they do so very effectively. they're crappy PowerPoint presentations. So if you're going to give a lecture, and there is a place for lectures, I mean, they're about information transmission. I personally don't think they should be in class, but whatever. If you're going to give a lecture, you might as well try to make it clear. So I've written a couple books on this, on using psychological principles to give clear and compelling PowerPoint presentations. So let me go through today the four most common errors based on a huge study we did that people make. Can I have the next slide, please, Rosie?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start with this cartoon, which you will see in a different light at the end. Can we move this window? It's blocking the right, or at least slide the whole thing over or something, because you can't see the final part of the cartoon.
I can see it on my, sorry, what can you see?
Oh, can the rest of you see it? Because I can't. Okay, so I see all of you. Let me see if I can, I can move you.
You
Cool.
can click thumbnail view, and
Yeah.
I think that fixes it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got it under control. Okay, so it says, I've worked up a PowerPoint presentation for you, Excellency. This is a Doonesbury. You know what PowerPoint is, right? PowerPoint? Mr. Duke, I come from a small, isolated mountain village. We have no running water or paved roads or healthcare services. Very sad. Well, let me explain. Our mayor uses PowerPoint. So his point was that they're not that primitive. But as I say, I'm going to return to this at the very end, and you're going to see it in a very different light than you see it now. Can I have the next slide, please? So there's four psychological principles that I want to talk about, which I call the Goldilocks rule, the Rudolph rule, and the rule of four, and the birds of a feather rule. Next slide, please. So let's start with the Goldilocks rule. Next slide, please. So a common error is what I call pointless PowerPoint. What did I just do? Okay. Next slide, please. So your goal, if you're using PowerPoint to give a lecture or present more generally, is always to inform and illuminate. Sometimes it's also to convince, but it's always to inform and illuminate. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, you need to start by defining your message. Before you start to put together a PowerPoint presentation or a lecture, you got to be clear on what it is you want them to walk away with. Next slide, please. Decide what message you want the viewers to take away from the presentation as a whole, and do the same thing for each part. If it's a complex presentation like this one is, it's got well-defined parts, and there's a goal for each one of them. So the Goldilocks rule is the amount of detail should be neither too much nor too little, but just right to make your point. So not too much, not too little, just right. Next slide, please. So see this car, the drawing of a car? Is this a better drawing of a car than the next one? Can you show that to me, please? Can we go back to the previous slide? Okay, so which is better? What do you think? Okay, why don't we stop there? Which is better? Does anybody have a view?
It depends on the goal.
Exactly. So you can't ask that question. It was a trick question. This is a better illustration if your point, your purpose is to show forces that act on the wheels. Go back one, please. This is a better one if your purpose is to show major systems of a car. So it depends on your goal. But there's something in common between the two. Can we go 2 slides forward, please? Okay, you don't show any more or any less than you need to make your point. So in that second, let's go back one actually, please. In this one, we've emphasized just the foreground. That is, forces that affect the motion of the wheels. Everything else has gone in the background. That's appropriate if that's the point of this. Next slide, please. Everybody knows that you shouldn't present too little information, but a lot of people don't realize that presenting too much information is also a problem. So look on the left, the point is to show median real estate prices. but you've cluttered it all up. On the right, you're just focusing on where they are now, 1990, and where they are at the max. So it's as bad to give too much information as it is to give it too little. If there's too much, they have to search and filter. That's work. People don't like working. I don't know if you noticed that or not yet. Next slide, please. So you have to speak to a particular audience. This is from the Rocky Horror movie show, if any of you have ever been to that. Knowing what they're interested in and focusing on what information is relevant to their concerns vis-a-vis the message you want to send. Next slide, please. So an example, I say using psychological principles to create and deliver clear and compelling presentations. That's a longer presentation that I give on this stuff. Next slide, please. Sometimes I have to tell them what it's not. So when I say psychological principles, a lot of people think when you think of psychology, they think of shrinking, psychotherapy. So I have to tell them it's not about psychotherapy. Next slide, please. What I mean by psychological principles is the nature of mental processes, such as those used in perception, memory, cognition. So depending on who I'm talking to, I need to calibrate the message to make contact with what they're interested in and also start in a way that'll allow them to come on the journey, give them the foundation, starting with what foundations they happen to need. Next slide, please. So depending on the audience, you need to adjust the background information, the concepts. Rosie, could you move the cursor so it's in the left corner? Okay, anywhere. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Background information, concepts, jargon, and I strongly recommend not using jargon unless you absolutely have to, unless you're speaking to a technical audience who you're convinced in advance really understands the jargon, in which case it's fine. And adjust your pace. So this kind of talk is hard for me because I can't see all of you at once. So it's hard for me to know if you're getting bored, in which case I should speed up, or if you're finding it's too fast, your eyes are glazing over and I should slow down. But in general, if you're in front of an audience where you can see everyone, you can get feedback. It'll help you adjust your pace. Next slide, please. So your job, you already know what you have to say, is to make contact with your audience, okay? Making use of the Goldilocks rule. So it's late in the day for me, and I've been traveling last week, so my memory's not so good. Can someone remind me what the Goldilocks rule is? What is the Goldilocks rule?
Like not under-delivering or over-delivering information, just understanding it from your audience's perspective and delivering just what they need to know to achieve your goal of what you're trying to tell them.
Exactly right. Excellent. And well put, by the way. You did a nice example of the Goldilocks rule. Not too much, not too little, just right. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so let's go to the second principle, the Rudolph rule. So a common error in PowerPoint presentations is poor direction, poor helping people navigate through the slides. Have the next slide, please. So only show them what they need to see at any given time and lead them through it. So use your pointer. Next slide, please. It's often convenient to actually build a pointer into the slide. Can I have the next slide, please? And can you alternate on this one, please? So, okay, you can use animation, go back and forth if you will, to draw their attention to, there you go, to the part of the brain that I happen to want to talk about. This is the nucleus accumbens, which is involved in the dopamine system that underlies reward. So I can build that in, and if I knew that I was going to do it on a Mac where I was assured of animation, that animation would work, I could just have that thing animated. Next slide, please. So the brain is a difference detector. That's true at multiple levels of scale in the brain. Next slide, please. So attention is grabbed by changes. So changes in size, something's bigger and bolder, you're going to notice it, or color, or location. Could you just press the cursor? Nothing attracts attention more than movement. Can't help it. It's a very basic part of your brain that's functional almost from birth. And it can override lots of other things. Next slide, please. So you can make use of this in all kinds of ways. So for example, here's a way that I introduced a talk. So it was something about the brain. Push the next slide, please. So I used change for that part of the outline. This is an outline that I'm presenting in a novel way. So I had to get larger to grab their attention. This is the first thing I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. When I got done with that section, I then went to the next part, and so forth. So I was able to use these principles in a novel way to grab their interest and to direct their attention to what I wanted them to pay attention to. Okay, next slide, please. Don't let the audience's attention wander. Direct it by making different elements larger, moving, brighter, or louder. So the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer rule is people notice what's different. Next slide, please. So here we have Rudolph, and you remember his distinctive characteristic, which was he was the only reindeer that had a red nose, and it made him different, which was rough on him initially, but then it became a mark of distinction. So something different will draw attention. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Next slide, please. So here, for example, we have a slide from The Economist magazine, which is British. And so they made the British line darker and heavier. Grabs your attention. That's the foreground. That's what they're interested in. Next slide, please. Here's another from The Economist. So they're interested in London, the city in the West End. They make it different. So grabs your attention. Next slide, please. So this is what you don't want to do. So here are a bunch of bullets say, this is what I want you to pay attention to now. I want you to pay attention later, later, later. This is not good because it lets the audience's attention wander over it. Next slide, please. This is much better. You make it clear what's in the foreground and what's in the background. So by varying the salience, you draw their attention, whether they want it to be drawn or not, in a way that you control, and you can help guide them through what's on the slides and what's in your presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so Rudolph rule. Again, because of these problems of jet lag and so forth, I don't remember. What's the Rudolph rule again? Someone tell me. Rudolph, Red-Nosed Reindeer. Why is he relevant?
Just unmute and talk, people.
The Rudolph principle is that the Rudolph rule is that we know and we see what's different because it affects us deeply psychologically, especially with movement, that we will notice what stands out and what is essentially highlighted for us, and we recognize change.
So that's all correct. There's a single word which I'm looking for, which you didn't mention, which I'm sure you know because you talked all around it. The key is to guide the viewers, what? Starts with an A, ends with an N, has 2 syllables, rhymes with mention.
Guide their attention.
Yes! Perfect. Yeah, that's what you want to do. Okay, excellent. Now let's go to the rule of 4. Next slide, please. Common error, too much material. This is a really common error. Next slide, please. So, I stumbled on this somewhere, and I wanted to put it in a book I wrote on this stuff. So I had to get permission from the author. So I contacted him and I sent him an email and asked if I could reprint it. And he was a suspicious sort and asked why. What do you want to do with it? And I said, it illustrates a point I want to make very well. And he said, what's that point? Actually, I had a conversation with him on the phone. And I said, well, you know, there was kind of a lot of material in that graphic. And he said, oh, no, I would never actually show this graphic. I just wanted to illustrate all the features of my software program. But of course, it's overwhelming. You can't really understand much about what's going on in here. It violates not only the Goldilocks rule of being too much for what the message was he wanted to give, but it also violates just human capacity for taking information. Have the next slide, please. So, all right, let's try this. I don't know if it'll work with this modality or not, but let's give it a try. So it's a demo. You'll soon hear a sequence of spatial directions, such as north, northeast, southeast. And you should visualize a 1-inch line segment for each of these directions, oriented in the appropriate way. So if it was north, it would be vertical. If it were west, it would go to the right. Sorry, go to the left. And you should connect each one of the previous one to form a pathway. Let me give an illustration. Next slide, please. So let's say you heard north, northeast, southeast, south. You're gonna have your eyes closed. Okay, so north, northeast, southeast, south. One every couple seconds. Next slide, please. Here's the pathway you should visualize. It starts going north, and then it goes northeast, up to the right, then it goes southeast, and then south. So is everybody clear on what you're supposed to do with your eyes closed? Any questions from anybody? Okay, I need you to close your eyes in order for this to work. Everybody close your eyes. Next slide, please, Rosie. Don't cheat, keep your eyes closed. All right, get ready, I'm gonna read you the directions. Northeast, southeast, north, east, south, east, north, east, south, northeast, southeast. Okay, next slide, please, Rosie. Okay, can you open your eyes? Okay, did you get it right? Here's the question. Did you get it right? And if you got it right, did you notice the repeating patterns? Did anybody here get it right who did not notice the repeating patterns? Okay, there are 11 separate, could you go back a slide, please, Rosie? So there are 11 separate directions, which is way more than you can hold in your short-term memory. But the trick is, it's not the directions you hold, it's what are called chunks, which are organized units. So next slide, please. So if you notice the repeating patterns, you can organize it into 4, which is about the limit of how many of these chunks people can hold. Next slide, please. So the rule of 4, show no more than 4 units in a slide. Next slide, please. Common error, way too many bullets. You want 4 units. Next slide, please. A rule of thumb, use no more than 2 lines per bulleted entry and no more than 4 bullets per slide. That's pushing it, but people can absorb that reasonably well. Next slide, please. So look what happens as a byproduct when you try to cram too much into a display. It gets too small. So if you think about it, the more words you put up on a page, the smaller they're going to have to be to cram them all in. So when it gets too complicated, it also gets hard just to discriminate. Next slide, please. So you don't want to cause eye strain. So, or mental overload. Next slide, please. All right, last of these rules. Oh, again, I got this memory problem. What was the rule of 4?
No more than 4 items on a single page, because that's all your brain can handle unless they're grouped.
Okay, that's right. So that last part is crucial. It's number of groups, number of units. Excellent. Next slide, please. Let's do the last of these 4 rules. Common error, poor grouping. So how do you determine what a group is? Well, it turns out it's well understood. Next slide, please. So use perceptual grouping laws to organize the display into 4 or fewer units, groups. So the birds of a feather rule. Okay, next slide, please. There are 2 aspects that are most common. So look on the top, that first row of the X's and O's, you see 2 groups. They're organized by similarity of shape, color, and size. So you got the big X's that are black and the little O's that are red. Notice the same number of X's and O's right below it now becomes 4 groups. So it's how they're arranged, not the number of X's and O's. It's how they're arranged that creates these perceptual units. Look on the bottom. Second big rule is proximity. Same number of X's in the top row and the bottom row. The top row, things that are near each other get grouped together. So you have 2 units of 4 each. And then below it, you have 4 units of 2 each. So by positioning things and using similarity, you can actually manipulate grouping in a way that will feed right into the rule of 4. Okay, it'll define what the groups are so you don't overload it. Next slide, please. So it works with anything. The rule of birds of a feather works even with birds. So here you see similarity on the top. The owls on the right grouped together by shape, color, size, and whatever those are. What are those birds anyway? I think they might be roadrunners. I don't know. They group together. On the bottom, you get proximity. So it works with anything. Next slide, please. So this is the famous pizza pie graph. You immediately were drawn to that one piece on the upper right. You first saw it. The first thing you looked at. Why? Because we broke the grouping. It's moved apart. So proximity's been disrupted, and it's black, and the rest of them are not black. So similarity's been disrupted. So you immediately can direct attention by violating these grouping rules. Next slide, please. So here you have a nice use of grouping. Income and car ownership. They're interested in the former Soviet bloc, Eastern Bloc. So that's the foreground. So you see they've got grouping by black. They're near each other. Hungary, Soviet Union, Eastern Germany, and so forth. And they're the same color. Everything else becomes the background. So they avoid overloading you this way. It's really just 2 big units. Next slide, please. Here's a beautiful use of similarity and proximity and labeling. So you want to try to avoid using a key in a graph if you can. The key is where there's a little patch, like with a color, and there's a label, and you have to memorize it and then go search for the corresponding thing. Direct labeling is much better. It requires less memory, less effort, and less searching. So here what you got is the label, like intensity of care, is grouped with the right part of the bar, the correct part of the bar, by color and proximity. So excess medical inflation, same thing. General inflation, same thing. Population change. Isn't that neat? Direct labeling. Next slide, please. Here's a gorgeous thing. This was not something you'd probably give in a presentation. It was in a magazine. This is the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and they're trying to show you who's playing what. And it's an overwhelming amount of information. But when you first look at it, you see 3 big wedges. It's hierarchical. So you see 3 big wedges, each of which is organized into no more than 4 units. So look on the right. You've got the double basses organized together by proximity and similarity. You've got the cellos, and you've got the violas, and so forth. Isn't that cool how they did this? I'm sure they knew nothing about these grouping laws. They just intuited it. Whoever designed this really knew what they were doing. So you can use them to organize things hierarchically. And the crucial thing is there be no more than 4 units at any given level of hierarchy. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go back. Oh, wait a minute, I'm forgetting. What was the bird of a feather rule about? Birds of a feather?
Group similar items together, whether it be by color, shape, size, but make them all essentially grouped together and no more than 4 per page.
You're almost exactly right. So the key is you can create units that'll feed into the rule of 4 piece by using proximity, making them next to each other, and similarity. That's the key. You can create it. So let's look at this slide again. Can I have the next slide? So let's go through it. Next slide. So it says, I've worked up a PowerPoint presentation for you, Excellency. So this is where you're set up by the Goldilocks rule, because you think they're presenting no more and no less than you need to understand. Next slide, please. Okay, next. And now look what they've done for grouping them. They've used proximity and similarity to group the 2 figures. So you have this sense that they're really interacting, even though they're not looking at each other. They're a unit. So you know what PowerPoint is, right? PowerPoint. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the rule of 4. So, and also the Goldilocks rule, you'll see. Mr. Duke, I come from a small isolated mountain village. By the way, that organizes as a unit in linguistics, which is hierarchically organized. I come from a small isolated mountain village. It's hierarchically organized in terms of the concepts. We have no running water, paved roads, or healthcare services. So the rule of 4 is being used effectively here to organize it hierarchically. It's not just visual, it's anything. So you can only take in about 4 units at a time, be they linguistic, visual, whatever. Also the Goldilocks, because again, you think this is what you need to know. Next slide, please. And then Rudolph, very sad, let me explain. Our mayor, they have a mayor, they're not that primitive, uses PowerPoint. And you notice that it's darker, so it pops out at you as being what's important. Okay, next slide, please. So, all right, remind me, what are these 4 rules? Somebody, what's Goldilocks? I'm listening. You shake
That you're giving the right amount of information for your audience and presenting it in the correct way, not too much, not too little, not over-exaggerated or under-exaggerated.
So just right for your purposes. Excellent. And the Rudolph, what is the Rudolph rule?
Key points of information stand out.
Right. So make it different. So it stands out different by color, by size, shape, movement, and so forth. Okay, rule of 4.
This one's about not using more than 4 units of information at a time.
Excellent. More than that, 3 is actually good, to tell you the truth. 4 you can push. But more than that, people can't hold it in mind. And finally, how do you know what a unit is? Birds of a feather rule. I emphasize 2 aspects of that. There are a lot of them, but I emphasize 2. What were they?
Similarity and proximity. So
What are they?
So you group things that are similar, and you ensure that there is enough proximity between them that people can focus their attention on each of them.
Okay. So things that are near each other get grouped into a unit, and things that are similar get grouped into a unit. That's for visual forms. There are other rules for like sentences and stuff like that, for how you parse them, how you organize them into units. But it's the same idea that you want no more than 4 units, and there are rules that define what a unit is. Okay, so that's the talk. I noticed there I only focused on 4 rules. You know why I did that now. There are 8 altogether. I've written 2 books on this, and there are 8 of them altogether. I could give a second talk now where I've organized it hierarchically, do the other ones, but these are the most important ones. So let's open it up for questions. Thank you very much to Rosie for very effectively navigating us through this PowerPoint. It's well done. Appreciate that. Can we get back? We can all see each other again. Gallery view. Yes, there we go. Okay, hello everybody. So we have a half an hour almost. Anybody have any questions, comments, or?
I actually have one. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. So majority of my EdSurge projects and a lot of projects I've done have actually been slideshows with my voice recording over it, instead of actually writing out different editorials or anything. But I want to kind of understand how I can actually tell if I'm following these rules or not. Like the rule of 4 is easy, but how do I tell if I'm proper? Like, does it come with time, or is there a system to where I can really understand if I'm following these?
Yeah, it's one of the books I wrote is very badly named. It's called Better PowerPoint, but it should be called the PowerPoint Checklist, because that's what it is. It's a set of exactly the question you're asking is what to look for, and it's a checklist for each of these things. Is what it is. In fact, I use that cartoon at the beginning and end of it. It's a lot like this talk, only it was all 8 of the rules. So there are things to look for in particular. I don't want to push the book. It's a very slim little paperback. It's probably available. It's probably available free online, since most of my books are. If you just Google for it, Better PowerPoint Kosslyn. Somebody's probably put the PDF up there already. Since I know the bigger book I wrote is definitely on there. since the publisher kept taking it down and then finally gave up. But the trick of these things always is it's almost impossible to do them from the get-go. You almost always have, it's like editing a paper you write. You almost always have to put it aside for a bit, then go back to it and look. So even me, after all these years of doing it, put it aside, then go through it, and I think about the different rules. So the message, have I been clear on what it is I want them to walk away with? And that's true for each part. Rule of 4, that's pretty straightforward. The birds of a feather, that's pretty straightforward. Guiding their attention through it, that's pretty straightforward, and so forth. But even though it's straightforward, it's not always obvious when you're in the middle of doing things.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sorry. In the example of the Rudolph rule, you showed the outline on the superimposed over the picture or the illustration of the brain, where each quadrant kind of became enlarged to highlight that portion, which that example also showed the rule of 4. But is there a reason that you did it in clockwise order rather than one line and then skip to the beginning of the next line?
Yeah, because people are used to rotating around a circle and clockwise. It's because of clocks. So it probably wouldn't have been horrible to do it the other way, but that was the convention that I chose.
I want to ask about the style of your presentation. So generally, I understand that you study active learning and you are an active advocate of active learning. How do you think like this presentation was more of a lecture than an active discussion, right? So do you think in this particular case, like it would have been more effective to do it in a more active style, like the styles that you recommend yourself, or in what situations do you think active learning has its limitations?
Yeah, so you have to know something to do active learning, so it's always in a flipped classroom kind of situation. But I must confess, I think you probably already had the background knowledge, and I would have been much better off having you do active learning with this. So I probably should have had 4 little mini activities where I gave you a problem to work through to figure out why something wasn't working so well and how it could be worked better, and get you to figure these things out and recreate them for yourself. It would have taken more time than I thought we had, but you'd remember it for the rest of your life. So it is true there is a place for reading books and for hearing lectures when you need to acquire information. But in this case, I think the information was pretty thin, and it's more like taking stuff you already are aware of on some level and making it explicit, helping you organize it. So it would have been better off. You're right. It would have been better to do it with active learning. I apologize for that.
It was good.
We had a conversation together already about lecture versus alternatives, so it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on the alternatives.
Alternatives to lectures?
Yes.
So there's 2 that I find appealing. One is active learning, which involves various kinds of exercises like problem solving or role playing or debates. I mean, various ways of using the information and makes it stick. But that assumes you've already acquired the information and now you're using it, which helps consolidate it and wire it in with everything else you know. The best way to acquire it in the first place, from my perspective, is adaptive learning platforms. So I like those because they can figure out the cognitive bugs that you happen to have, you personally, and they can both adjust the information that's given to you based on your bugs and also the pace. So I don't know about you, but like when I read a math book, I've lately been reading books on calculus for various reasons, I find parts of them are going too slowly. I get it. Let's move on. And other parts, I sit there staring, trying to figure out how they get from here to there. And it would have helped to have more of the steps made explicit or something. So adaptive learning platforms can really do that. So those are the 2 things that I'm most focused on. What do you think?
You can do that with audiobooks. You can speed it up and slow it down. It's one way to use that tool.
Yeah, I think they're good, but you can skim and go back and hard copy books. I mean, I have nothing against books. I read them all the time, and I love audiobooks. So I've got a deal going with Audible. Some of our students are interns there for them this year, so it's a lot of fun for all of us. But I'm not sure they're as effective as an adaptive learning platform, at least for me. I'm sure there's a literature on this, but I just haven't looked. Somebody must have compared the two. But they're hard to make comparable because adaptive learning may take longer than just reading through a book, but you get a lot more out of it. So how do you figure that trade-off?
I mean, in my case, adaptive learning has been extremely successful versus reading a book. If I sit down with a book, it takes me forever to understand it. But if you just give me problems after problems that slightly increase over time, like I'll learn it and I'll know it forever, very often.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of adaptive learning. What I'm not a fan of, by the way, is learning styles in the usual sense. There just doesn't seem to be any good data for it. Seems, in fact, lots of data against it. It's kind of surprising, really surprising. But I do think that there are things like some people prefer learning from a computer and some people like a human tutor. I think there are preferences like that. And I think the learning style stuff might affect how willing you are to get into it in the first place and how willing you are to stick with it, which I don't think anybody's ever looked at. So in other words, if you're a visual learner, you think it might be more appealing to you to try to learn something visually than auditorily. Even though if you actually did it auditorily, you'd be just as good as if you did it visually. So there may still be something to that. It hasn't been looked at to my knowledge.
What do you think the pedagogical and cognitive differences are? Just going off of Bradley's questions in your comment, is between adaptive learning in a broader sense, like in a classroom where peer instruction is available, where there's a face-to-face interaction and an in-person interaction with your instructor, versus adaptive learning on a very technology-based platform where there might not even be a live instructor?
Well, I think it depends how well they're done in both cases. I don't know that the differences in media per se affect it. But I think if there is a difference, it's going to probably reflect motivation. That is, some people are more motivated when there are people around and they try to please them. Other people have exactly the opposite. They don't like interacting with other people because they feel it's stressful and they're put in a evaluative situation. They prefer machines. So this is what I meant. There may be a different kind of learning style thing that people haven't really looked at yet. But I think these things in general depend on how well they're done. That probably is much more important than the differences in the media per se.
I actually had a question about when we were talking about active learning. So further in May, I have to go and present in front of the California Community College Senate on an economic policy that I'm trying to get in place in California community colleges. How would I use active learning to convince them of the benefits of my economic policy?
Well, active learning is about learning. It's about acquiring information and learning to use it. It's not about convincing people. So it's a different goal. If your goal is to convince them, you want them to make a decision a certain way, and that's probably not something that I would approach with active learning per se. But that doesn't mean that you can't use some of the principles from the science of learning to get them more engaged in thinking through your argument. So if you have a compelling argument, the key is to get them to pay attention to it and think it through to the point where if they have integrity and you're intellectually honest, they will have to go along with your argument if in fact it's really compelling. So you want to make sure they understand your argument. So you want to make sure that you present it very systematically. You leave enough time for them at each step. So a crucial thing is that they get the steps before you go on to the next steps. Because if they don't, forget it, you've lost them earlier. I think in that kind of context, they might resent you're trying to get them to do exercises and so forth. So you have to be careful. The other thing to keep in mind is active learning is often slower. It takes more time than other means of delivery. So if they're feeling under time pressure, they may not be favorably inclined towards you if you're taking up more of their time, which could backfire. So I would focus on making a really good argument if I were your position.
I had another question for you. In addition to your own work, what would you recommend for applied information on pedagogical models?
There's a book called Make It Stick. You know that one? By Brown et al. Brown, McDaniel, and Rudiger, McDaniel, something called Make It Stick, which I think is a very good resource for this sort of thing. Richard Mayer has got some books that are worth looking at. If you send me an email, there's a big book that we've written at Minerva, which the MIT Press is publishing. It's got like 29 chapters. And one of them that I happened to write was on the science of learning, and I have a bibliography at the end. So if I'll send you a copy of that, and the bibliography will be useful for you.
Thank you.
Sure. Just send me an email, skosslyn@minerva.kgi.edu.
I can send that to you guys.
Okay, sorry.
So this is maybe a big question, but so if you were to single-handedly design like a university, so I know that you've had a huge amount of input into Minerva, but if it was all you, if you got to make every decision, what would your university look like?
Pretty much Minerva. So I was the first faculty member. So when they hired me to be the founding dean, now I'm chief academic officer, but because we have 5 deans and we have 40 faculty and it's grown. But when I first started, I was the only academic. So faculty meetings were very, very brief. They never were contentious. It was remarkable how smoothly things went. So for the longest time, I was able to, in consultation with other people, particularly Ben Nelson, figure out what would make sense and just do it. So there's nothing about Minerva that, what do you think, is that true? It's going to evolve in the direction that I want it to. I want more adaptive learning for the stuff before class. So we're actually working actively on that now. There's a company that I'm working with to try to get them to develop materials for us in particular. But Minerva, I think, is the best example of a principled, empirically motivated pedagogy. And the content is designed for this idea of practical knowledge, which is knowledge you can use to adapt to a changing world. Not vocational, it's not narrow, it's not pre-professional. It's useful in its own right. So it's going to take years before we get to something that's near to a finished product. We'll never finish it, but it requires iterations. So the cornerstone courses, our first year curriculum is now in its 3rd year, and it's much, much better than it was initially. It's vastly better. It takes about 3 years of teaching things before they start to approximate something good, really good. So no, Minerva is pretty much what I would have done if I were just doing it by myself. Why? What would you do differently?
Oh, that's a dangerous question for me to get into. I would have a lot more adaptiveness of curriculum. So I think that our first year curriculum is very focused on on habits of mind and foundational concepts and getting to grips with some really, really important things. And in my opinion, that a lot of that dies down quite a lot through years 2 and 3. So I would make it much less focused on these kind of traditional academic paths. So I'm studying data science and philosophy, ethics, and law. They're very, they're traditional pathways in a sense, like obviously in a non-traditional context. But I would extend the first year much more, have much more tendrils throughout the program. I don't know. There are a lot of
We will do that, by the way, Rosie. You just nailed it. I'm really impressed. That is the single biggest problem we're having now, and we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to solve it. Very good. You just nailed it. So it'll take a couple of years, and then we'll hopefully get it much better. But you're absolutely right in what you just said. Thank you. We can talk about this more, you and I, offline if you want to.
Love to.
Okay, other people, more questions about anything?
I want to ask about what you think of, applying personalized mental models, learning and applying mental models on our own. Do you think people sort of pick that up from our interactions? Do you think there should be a structured way to learn mental models, and how similar do you think they are to habits of mind?
Yeah, no, I think there should be. I think mental models are really, really important. They're structures that you use for organizing the world. So they should definitely be part of a curriculum. We have them. I don't think we ever use those terms at Minerva. I don't remember now, but we snuck them in there. There are actually quite a few of them that are exactly of that sort. So our Dean of Social Sciences knows quite a bit about this in particular. Yeah, mental models.
I guess on a biological sense, why do mental models structurally matter?
Say more. I'm not sure I understand your question.
So, how do mental models change the way we sort of think it biologically? I sort of understand why it will matter cognitively, but what is the biological underpinnings of that? And if it's not a relevant question, you don't have to answer it. But
no, it's okay. So anything mental is almost by definition biological, because the mind is what the brain does. At least that's how I think about it. The mind is what the brain does. So perception, memory, reasoning, all that stuff are actually brain functions. It's not your big toe. It's not your liver. It's the brain. Okay. So mental models are going to be neural circuits that store information in their synapses in various ways that are used in two ways. One is so-called bottom up, where information coming to you from the world gets organized. You make sense out of it, okay, which is critical, or you're not going to be able to act on it in any kind of systematic and meaningful way. And the other is so-called top down, where you use these mental models to guide your expectations, so that you don't walk into a situation absolutely cold. You have some idea of what to expect, which helps you direct your attention and so forth in ways that are efficient and useful. So mental models are really important. And ultimately, because they're mental, they're going to be a function of what the brain is doing. Some of these models, by the way, actually involve areas of the brain that are involved in movement. So they're really drawing on different areas that are involved in different kinds of functions. Some of them are visual, some of them are more linguistic or logical, and they actually will rely on different parts of the brain. So if you had brain damage, which I don't recommend, but God forbid, it might selectively affect some of these mental models, depending where the damage was, more than others. So it is important how the mental arises from the brain for multiple different reasons. Important.
I had actually a pretty simple question. I know you were talking about graphs quite a bit during that, and majority of everything I do, I pull data from different studies and I put it into graphs and use the graphs to explain to people. When it comes to visual graphs, do you have any, Excel is very limited with the way the graphs look. Is there any software you could recommend, maybe visually, or any tricks maybe you can think off the top of your head?
I gave up at one point. I just did them by hand because I could never find any that. I've got a book I wrote called Graph Design for the Eye and Mind. And I think every one of those graphs was done by hand. I just don't think, for whatever reason, any of the existing packages I've seen follows these basic principles. I gave you 4 rules, 8. And they screw things up all the time. They use keys. They don't have to. They can do direct labeling. So you have a line graph with 2 lines. 2 lines, surely you can find someplace you can directly label each of them. No, they don't. They give a segment of one line, a segment of the other up in the upper right with a label, and you have to go look at them, memorize it, search around. Why? I don't know. I've talked to people in a couple of these companies about why they do this, and there's no good reason. And one of my former students went to one of these major companies to work and tried to convince them to use the principles. Too much inertia. So if you find one, I'd love to know what it is, because I'm not aware of a graphics program that I would, a program for converting data into graphs that I would recommend. I'm not aware of one. Sorry.
If I do find one, I'll shoot it to you in email.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Awesome. Sorry, go for it, Daniel.
Hopefully it's really quick. I recently heard that humans are not good at seeing angles, therefore we should reject pie charts. What is your take?
It's not that we're not good at seeing angles. We see angles. We're just bad at estimating relative areas. It depends on the data. So if you were trying to illustrate that something was a quarter of the whole, we're quite good at that. At seeing that a circle has been divided into quarters. We're actually very good at that. Or half or something else. It really depends on the data. I'm not a big fan of absolute rules that you should never ever do X. So even the rule of 4, where I showed you that complicated graphic that I reprinted in my book that I had to ask the guy for permission, notice it was useful. I used it. So in some situations, almost anything can be appropriate. It really depends on your purpose. So it's difficult for me to read Tufte or somebody who says you should never ever use pie charts. It depends. And the other thing is, what's the message you want to convey? Is it just that one thing's larger than another, or do you want something more quantitative? If you really want the specific amount, you can always put the numbers either in the wedges or right around the outside rim, if that's what you want. I don't necessarily recommend that, but again, it depends on what you want to convey.
Spectacular. Thank you so much, Dean Kosslyn.
My pleasure. All right, y'all. Thanks for your interest. So good luck to you. And if you have any questions, send me an email. I'll be happy to answer. Have a good rest of the evening, or whatever it is, wherever you are. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye then. Let's see. I have to log off somehow. Need me.
The bottom right-hand corner.
Got it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Sweet, awesome. Thanks for coming, guys. There were some good questions. So next week we're doing democratic and alternative education, which is my personal favorite topic in this whole little curriculum that I've written for you guys, and so we're gonna have a lot of fun with that. I think we're gonna do some cool shit. The other really cool thing that we have to announce today, and I will send this in an email this evening, is so as you may or may not know, our leadership model at EdSurge Independent runs in a way that each leader overlaps. So you do 2 semesters, and each leader overlaps by 1 semester. So this is my this is Ali's second semester, so she's gonna be leaving us, and I'm going to continue into summer, and we would like to solicit applications from you guys to lead for summer and for next fall. So this is a really exciting opportunity. It's paid in a slightly depressingly small amount, but it is paid. It's so over summer, it'll be 11 weeks, and about 15-ish hours a week, and then in the full semester it'll be 15 weeks and about 10 hours a week, so it balance out. So I'm going to be sending application forms for that. The due date for that is let me click on this button. So the due date for the application will be April 3rd. There'll be interviews for successful candidates between April 5th and April 11th. Offers will be made by April 14th. And then the acceptance deadline will be April 22nd. And the idea is that if you accept an offer, then you're kind of committing. Does anybody have any questions right now about that?
Is there any particular qualities you're looking for in a EdSurge leader?
Yes, there are. Let me read you the little list that we have. But it's going to play silly. Here we go. 1 second. So, the eligibility requirements, unless we have significant exceptions. So if you don't meet one of these requirements, I encourage you to still apply. So those would be being an undergraduate student in December 2017, and basically to have completed the this cohort. So we're looking for somebody who is both a good team worker and a good leader, someone who has strong communication skills, strong organizational skills, someone with a working knowledge of education so that they're knowledgeable about the topics on the discussion, something who has something to add to the cohort, and someone who will be available for both semesters. So the specific skills that we're looking for, and this is a skills table and all the instructions are on the document. So we're not necessarily looking for somebody who is completely, who is great in every task, but rather for somebody whose skills complements the other skills on the team. So those tasks will be editing other students' work, curating Facebook and Slack communities, website management, so curating the Medium site / creating better formats, leading sessions, so planning and delivering sessions, parts of sessions, curriculum development, logistics, program development, so creating processes, writing guides, helping out with that, and recruitment, so students, guest speakers, and future leaders. So yeah. Any other questions on that? Spectacular. I will send you the application form this evening, and there's a lot of information on there. It's certainly doesn't follow any of those presentation rules because I have a lot of info to just spray. So it's all just sprayed. So you'll just have to read it yourself. Spectacular. Does anybody have any comments, questions, confusions, answers to life's questions?
Yeah, so we're really excited to get your applications and see who's going to be running this next year as I kind of transition out. And all of you guys are more than qualified. You guys have been really committed, and we see your excitement in education. So excited to receive those and make our decision. But yeah, did you already announce the NMC thing, Rosie?
Only by email. So so everybody got the email, right? There's a cool conference going down, and they're offering scholarships of details that I can't quite remember to attend this conference for people from underrepresented groups. So if you haven't responded to that and you meet those criteria, please let me know, and I will pass your name forward to the section committee.
I'll be there, so I'd love to meet all of you guys and speak on the same panel as you guys. So make sure that if you fit those qualifications, just let us know and we'll connect you.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. See you next week for my favorite session. It's going to be great. Bye.